Good evening. Thank you so much for coming tonight. As you know, we're here to talk to you a little bit about some of the things that we've brought into this school year and some of the changes that we've made as we're moving forward with lots of new things. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with some of them if you've read the local newspaper. Some of those things were highlighted in there. And so first we're going to talk about our new reading series. We're going to talk about the Common Core. We're going to talk about how all of those things have brought us to this evening today. So starting with this little cartoon, you can kind of get an idea of where we are. So one of the things that we're talking about a lot is now, there was a time when we as administrators would go into classrooms and we would really look to the teachers and what are the teachers teaching, and we would be looking at a lot of those things and those indicators, whereas now we're really shifting that focus from the teaching to the learning, and are our children learning what we are expecting them to learn and know and be able to do by the end of each school year. And so that's part of the focus.
It's really how much we can see the child mastering something and applying it, because that's true learning. Why do we learn? We learn so that we can apply it to a new situation. And so that focus is changing a little bit, where it's just not covering curriculum anymore, but really being sure that when the child leaves the room, the child is really learning and applying what they've learned.
And I'm sure many of you have heard the term the Common Core State Standards, which of course New Jersey adopted. And so as a result of the adoption of the Common Core State Standards and our adoption of a new literacy series, one of the things that we recognized over the last several years was that our report card needed to change as well, because what we were noticing was that our report card had a lot of gaps, things that we're not teaching anymore as a result of the Common Core. And there's lots of different controversies out there right now in regards to Common Core, but what we know is that is our reality. We are expected, being a part of a school within the state of New Jersey, we have adopted that, and that's what we're doing. We're moving forward with that. It is what it is. And so we're trying to do everything we can to help our children be prepared for the Common Core. And so all of those things have brought about this change to our report card.
Okay, one of the things for those of you who have older students, you might have noticed the report cards coming home to you and the teachers were blocking out with NA not applicable anymore, or the boxes were darkened in, because according to Common Core, what we teach on different grade levels has shifted. It might even come down a level, or it might go up a level, and so the report cards weren't matching up. So that is why we made the move last year, and what we did was we had a committee of teachers from each of the buildings, and they met throughout the year and discussed how they wanted to change it, how we wanted to align it more with Common Core and with the New Jersey state standards that were still in effect for science and social studies. They'd come back, they'd work with their teams, they'd make sure that everyone's input was there, and at the end of the year we had this finished product, which are the new progress reports and report cards, which you will see, which are on the back table. You've seen them at back to school night, and which will center our conversations this week and next for parent-teacher conferences.
So with the Common Core, we had major shifts from the way things were taught previously at the elementary level to where they are now. And there were major shifts in English language arts and mathematics, and we have them listed here for you. One of them, the biggest shifts in English language arts, was really looking at complex text and really shifting from that predominantly fiction to nonfiction, and increasing that amount of nonfiction that we've been used to before. So we have the more complex text, and then also really to develop that academic language and that vocabulary at each grade level. And then also one of the things that the children are really expected to do is being able to read and write and respond to that text through finding text evidence. You'll hear kids talking a lot, and you'll hear classroom teachers talking about being a detective and finding the evidence. So obviously it looks different at kindergarten as opposed to fourth grade, but nevertheless the children are really expected to be able to not only read something, but then be able to go back in and cite the evidence for how they got that answer, whatever that answer might be. And that's one of the different shifts. Before, we would ask children who, what, where, when, why questions, and that was where we kind of stopped. And now we're really digging deeper for them to be able to dig into that literature, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, and then produce those different kinds of answers regarding whatever those questions are. And then, of course, as I mentioned already, that third shift was that content-rich nonfiction. And and now it's really shifted. There's a higher percentage of nonfiction at younger ages than there was in the past.
So it's 50-50. What Common Core is saying, from kindergarten through fourth grade, there should be a 50-50 of fiction and nonfiction. In the past, we tended to lean toward the fiction over the nonfiction. Now we're saying it should be an even. As they get into the middle school, so your fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth, you're going to see more of a 40-60, 60 being the nonfiction. And by the time they're in high school, it's going to be 30% fiction, 70% nonfiction. So we're getting them ready for that college workload where we know nonfiction is predominantly what's used.
Before Common Core, what was the fiction percent? I mean, how much lower was it?
I think it was heavier on the fiction. It certainly wasn't an equal balance.
30, 70, 28?
I'm not 100% sure.
I don't
but
think
I
that they've ever put a numeric value to it before, but I would guess, if I were to venture to guess, I would say probably 70-30.
Yeah, I think that elementary school was always more of the fiction piece to really teach kids, what's involved in a story, that character, that solution, that problem. And so the shift really is we need them to look at nonfiction equal. And the funny thing is, when you walk into classrooms, kids love nonfiction. From the littlest guy up to fourth grade, they love to read nonfiction. They love to read the thing that interests them, that connects them to the world. And so that 50-50 is a pretty good thing for us here in the elementary schools, to expose them more to that nonfiction piece.
And one of the other shifts that we've talked about, and we've said this for years, at the younger ages, children are they're learning to read, and then as third grade, it shifts from learning to read to reading to learn, and obviously that content, that nonfiction, is that important piece for them to be able to learn other kinds of things across different content areas, and that's where that we're really having that shift even earlier in the elementary grades. Mathematics also had some major shifts as well. One of the things that you'll hear people talk about in regards to Common Core for mathematics is, in the years ago, we would do things and they would describe it as going a mile wide and an inch deep. So you might talk about, for example, for lack of a better example, we'd talk about money. And so they might be exposed to money in kindergarten, very small, coins, maybe quarters, maybe nickels, dimes. First grade, they're doing it again. Second grade, they're doing it again. Third grade, they're doing it again, but just touching on it and not getting really to the conceptual understanding of money and of all those terms. Well, now there are fewer topics and they're digging deeper. So instead of being that mile wide and inch deep, it's the other way. They have fewer topics and they go deeper into those topics. That's one of the most major shifts. Another one is that coherence, because what we want to see is that linkage between one grade level to the next, so that they're mastering whatever is expected at that grade level and they're ready to then move on to that in the next grade level, as opposed to just skimming the surface, not touching it again perhaps, and then seeing it in the next grade. This time, now they're looking at it, they're mastering it before they go into that next grade. And then that last shift is that rigor. And again, one of the things that you'll hear us talk about a lot is we want to teach children skills, but then we want them to be able to do it independently and on demand. And that rigor is that they're redoing things and they're really showing it, that evidence of that mastery of those skills.
Okay, we're going to show you a little video. It's not very long, on Common Core. For those of you who are not familiar with the whole basis of Common Core, the video kind of outlines it for you to give you a little background. It's very quick, very simple, but it really touches upon the whole idea of why Common Core.
And while that's loading, you can see there's a website on the bottom, corestandards.org. If you're looking for any kind of other information regarding Common Core standards, that's a great website that has lots of information. And if you Google Common Core state standards, it comes up.
Like it or not, life is full of measuring sticks. How smart we are, how fast we are, how well we can, compete. But up until now, it's been pretty hard to tell how well kids are competing in school and how well they're going to do when they get out of school. We like to think that our education system does that. But when it comes to learning what they really need to be successful after graduation, is a girl in your neighborhood being taught as much as her friend over in the next one? Is a graduating senior in, say, St. Louis as prepared to get a job as the graduate in Shanghai? Well, it turns out the answer to both of these questions is no. Because for years, states have been setting different standards for what students should know and be able to do at each grade level. That's making it too hard to know if our kids are really doing well enough overall, and if they can really compete for a job someday. What we really need are clear goals. That's where the Common Core state standards come in. They're like a total sea change in education. Consistent, strong, clear benchmarks for English language arts and math. Here's how it works. You can think of kindergarten through 12th grade like a giant staircase. Each step is a skill your child needs to learn before stepping up to the next one. But right now, too many kids aren't really confident with like 2 plus 2 before they have to move on to 2 times 2. We need more focus on the skills that help them move up the stairs, or they can slip up and fall behind. And there's another problem. What if everyone's stairs were made at different heights? Well, here we go again. They are. So, a boy in Seattle who's rocking an A in English literature could be getting a C on his Chicago friend's staircase. Oops. We need to create consistent steps in education, too. So first, each standard creates a landing on the staircase, a stop along the way as your child heads toward high school graduation. Each stop is a chance for every parent and teacher to focus on the skills their students are supposed to know at that step, no matter the zip code, language, or race. And more importantly, each standard makes sure all students are learning what they need to know to get to graduation and beyond. Because something like counting to 100 leads to understanding dollars and cents, which eventually leads to understanding how to manage a budget. Secondly, the standards are consistent from school to school, and they match up against international standards too. Now we know how we're doing compared to just about everyone. So even though local communities will still design their own curriculum, with the same rules, everybody can compete on the same kind of staircase. But standards aren't learning. That's why we need teachers, parents, and students to help make that happen by working together to help kids meet these standards. The world's getting more and more competitive every day. But now, when our kids get to the top of their staircase, they can have way more options on where their life goes from there. Clear goals, confident, well-prepared students. That's the Common Core state standards.
You know, when you're looking at this, I think one of the key things that you have to bring away from it is the whole idea that we're no longer just covering things and moving on. You know, they got it, they didn't get it, but we still have to go on to the next topic. It's really looking at that topic that they didn't get and working on it until they master it. Okay, we're good? Okay. Okay, so what we decided to do when we looked at the Common Core standards, we knew that the literacy series we were using in the district for years, Treasures, was not aligned to Common Core. And so we adopted this year a series called Good Habits, Great Readers. And Good Habits, Great Readers is a different kind of approach to literacy because it really moves toward a small group instruction within the classroom based on the student's individualized needs. For years in district, we've used something called DRA, which is the Developmental Reading Assessment. And for about, I guess it's about 6 or 7 years, the teachers would test the children with using the DRA assessment and try to find out what their independent reading level was so that we can send a kid off to read on a book that's their level where they would not need any kind of an adult support. And then you would raise them up one level with DRA, and that would be their instructional level. And you would take the child in small groups with other children on that level, and you would meet their needs within that small group of reading with them to try to focus on the areas that they were having difficulty with and was preventing them from getting to that next level. DRA was used for a number of years, but on the same time we were using this basal reader, this Treasures, which really wasn't that compatible with it. So when we brought in Good Habits, Great Readers, it focuses more on the whole idea of small group instruction, and DRA fits beautifully into the package. So that is what you'll be seeing, and the teachers will be talking about during conferences with you, this new literacy series. A lot of you are hearing the children come home and say they're building stamina, they're working in small groups, they're setting goals as they get into the higher grades because they're really more focused on what their needs are instead of a whole class's needs. Okay, so What it is a comprehensive literacy program that's Common Core aligned. We're using it from kindergarten through grade 5. It is DRA based, so we're finding those individual levels that all the students are on and the needs, their strengths and their weaknesses, and how we can build on that through small group instruction. And it has a writing component to it, which is called Write Habits. We're introducing now, beginning probably the very beginning of December, something called Words Their Way, which will be the word study component of the new literacy series.
Which is also something that is individualized. So your children will have been given a spelling inventory, and based on how they perform on that spelling inventory, then the teacher will formulate groups for them to work on different kinds of patterns depending on where they are. Gone are the days of everybody gets the same spelling list on Monday and they take a test on Friday, when 2 weeks from now they might not be able to spell those words again on demand because they are not studying those words. So we're working on developmental patterns of where they are developmentally based on how they perform on those assessments. And so that's something else that as another, additional component of Good Habits, Great Readers.
We kind of took it out, laid it out in smaller components to introduce it because there was just so much. It's a program that encompasses a great amount of work, so it's coming in shifts, just so that parents are aware of that. What Good Habits, Great Readers is based on is 7 habits. We want the children to understand themselves as a reader. We want them to make sense of the text, not just read it, but truly understand it. Because Common Core, remember, one of those major shifts is the children should really be digging deeper into a text and really be able to understand what they're reading and be able to prove why they are answering a question the way they are answering it by going back into that text and finding the evidence to support their answers. We want to teach them to use what they already know. So we're constantly asking them, what have you learned? How can you apply it? What do you know so far in the story? Question the story. What kind of questions can you ask yourself to monitor your comprehension as you go along? And, we want them to read to learn, as Ms. Dyer mentioned before, and then eventually, that gets them onto those higher levels when they're in the middle school and high school, and they really have to dig deeper into nonfiction. And to think critically about books. What do you like to do as an adult? When you're finished reading a really good book, what do you want to do? Talk about it. And we want kids to talk about it. We want kids to really, to get the feeling, to get excited about a book and to have conversations about it.
And these 7 habits are throughout from K up through 5. They may look differently at each level based on the age of the children, but that is the common theme. So, of course, it's a little bit of a change this year for them because like a 4th grader hasn't been exposed to the 7 habits in kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, but our kindergartners will go from the beginning all the way through, and we'll have that as that grows throughout their experience in elementary school. Some of the other things you might have heard about, or this summer there was an article in the paper about some of the work that we were doing. As Mrs. DiMatteo mentioned before, we did things in steps because it was a lot of change that we were asking our teachers to do at one time. And so what we did, knowing that we had adopted Good Habits, Great Readers, what we did was, I'll call it a book study, but it was much more than a book study. We took a look at, there's a book that's called The Daily 5, and then there's a book that goes along with it. It's called The Cafe, and we worked on that throughout the summer. And what The Daily 5 is a structure that the teachers put into place because, as Mrs. DiMatteo talked about before, we're expecting teachers to be individualizing or working with children in small groups based on their needs, but what is everybody else doing? And so the Daily 5 helps build that structure for the teachers and their classroom, and so that the kids can be working on things independently or in small groups or with a partner based on those structures within the Daily 5 so that they can actually work with the teacher uninterrupted. Now, obviously, it looks much different in kindergarten than it does in 4th grade, but they're all working very hard in it. And so one of the things that will eventually, as the teacher unrolls or unravels each one of these different structures, what it ends up becoming is more choice time for kids. And we know that kids get more motivated by things when they have a choice in something. And so eventually, after they've worked through all of the different structures, there are 5, hence the name Daily 5, they are able to select what they're going to do next, because they basically, the teacher does a whole group lesson and then they go into their daily rotations, and so the children get to select one of those 5 components. And right now, a lot of the grade levels have finished and they're working on read to self, which basically means they're sitting and reading independently, and that's when they're working on building that stamina. And you might walk down the hallway and see a sign on the door that says, "Shh, we're building our stamina." And at the beginning of the year, first graders might have been up to 2 minutes to be able to sit and read independently. And now, I was in a first grade classroom a few weeks ago, and they read 21 minutes. That's huge for a first grader to be able to sit. They were not in, and I'm going to tell you, they were reading, and they were sitting, they were engaged in their text, and that was very refreshing to see them working, and they were engaged in what they were doing and enjoying it. So read to self is one of them. Read to someone is exactly that. They're reading to someone. Listening to reading, they might be in a reading center and they're listening to a story being read to them. Working on writing, which of course writing and reading are very intertwined, so one of them is working on writing. And then the last one is that word study component that we talked about with Words Their Way, and that's when they're really looking at patterns in words and how do we spell different kinds of words, whether they have a short vowel sound or a long vowel sound, and depending on what their levels are. And the teachers are working with those small groups while the children are working through those rotations.
What we're finding is that these are, years ago we used to talk about centers, but this is not just busy work. The kids are really engaged in reading and writing in different ways. And whether they're doing it alone or they're doing it with a partner, there is a very structured purpose to what they are doing, because they're on that independent level, remember, that we talked about with DRA, and yet the teacher has the opportunity to work with them for different kinds of strategy building, to raise the DRA level up, to really just help them with writing, conferencing on writing. When you go in for conferences this week and next, please look around the room. You're going to see there's a cafe menu up, which we'll explain in a minute. Some of the teachers have rotation sheets where the children, take like a clothespin with their name on it, and they're choosing the rotation. I was in a 4th grade the other day, and the teacher said, okay, choose your rotations, and then we're going to start. And they got up, they went to the chart, and they were taking their clothespin from wherever it was the day before and putting it on the rotation that they were going to work in. And technology is being used a lot more in the classroom, because we're very fortunate to have Chromebooks and laptops. That's becoming part of the Center for Writing. They're sitting and they're typing on the computers, and they're writing, or they're playing educational games on it, or things like that. So it's a very different look to that 135 minutes. We have a 135-minute literacy block. And so that is the structure that's really going to take that 135 minutes and really maximize what the students are doing during that time.
So you can imagine it's a challenge as a teacher to have 26-year-olds in a room and to try to keep them engaged in different activities. When we did those centers, it wasn't hurting anybody, but it wasn't necessarily the engaging things that we want them to be able to do now. And so with these choices, the kids are getting very excited. So we're starting to see lots of good things in our classrooms. Now the cafe is looking at, basically we're assessing children and coming up with, finding out things that they need to work on to build their reading skills. And the CAFE is an acronym that stands for, the C is comprehension, the A is accuracy, the F is fluency, and the E is
expanding vocabulary.
Expanding vocabulary, our little teamwork here. And so each one of those components really adds to building those reading skills. And so the teachers are going to be explicitly teaching them things that they can do to build their comprehension skills. A lot of times kids will read and read and read, and then you say, what did you just read? I don't know. But they're going to learn specific things that they can do so that they can actually increase those comprehension skills. And again, with the accuracy and the fluency and all the other things that we were talking about.
And try to notice in the classrooms, you'll see them. The interactive boards are up, and you'll see the skills that they're working on under it. And those skills come up in 2 ways. The teacher is either teaching it as a whole group, and so they're putting up there if they're doing, ask questions while reading. they might put that up under comprehension, but then individual students will eventually be putting their own goals up there. So if a student knows to expand vocabulary, they're going to be working on affixes to help them understand word meaning. That student could post their own. So we're gradually helping them to self-monitor their own learning in a way. What is it that I need as a learner? And so that, of course, looks different from a kindergartner saying what they need to a fourth grader. But if we're doing the same thing and in a consistent way year after year, by the time they get to third and fourth grade, this will be a very common occurrence for them. And now we get into the standards-based grading. So through all of this, we're keeping in mind the whole idea that we no longer can look at the material that we have to cover with students as just cover it and move on. We want to really be sure that we're setting goals for the students, and those goals are based on either the Common Core standards that you just saw the little video on in math or English language arts, and the rest of the subjects that the students study, science, social studies, performing arts, world language, PE, art, music, is still under the New Jersey standards. It's only Common Core in the two major subjects of English language arts and math. So when we look at that, we realize that just assigning a numerical grade really doesn't give us an overview if the kid got it. So if you think back to when you were in school, you know, you took a test and you moved on, but maybe there were portions of that topic that you didn't do so well with on the test. But it was kind of, okay, we're done with that unit, we're moving on. Standards-based grading really affords us the opportunity to look at what is, by grade level, the standards that these students have to know, and how long can we keep working with them until they've mastered it. Not just covered it, but truly mastered it so that they can move on to the next level. And so that's where we knew we had to make a change in the way that we were looking at how our students were being graded. So if you look at, this just gives you a little outline as to what standard-based grading is. We're talking about setting those specific learning goals based on the standards of Common Core in New Jersey. What a standard-based grading does is provide evidence of the student growth over time. So the students is starting at some point, and we're working them toward achieving this specific goal in the end. The grading system is a tool that allows the teacher to not only have a conversation with the student about their progress, but allows us to have a conversation with the student and the parents. There's no more mystery for the student. You know, it's not just a conversation between the teacher and you as parent. We're involving the student in this now. Where do you fall? What do we need to work on?
And as many of you had the copy of the new report card given to you at back to school night, one of the things to keep in mind is those standards that are listed there are those things that they're expected to know and be able to do by the end of this grading, at the end of this grade. So it's, you know, you might see, and I don't mean to jump ahead, but that's one thing that you have to keep in mind throughout this. Common Core state standards, even if you look at any of the websites, when you see that list of standards, that's what they're expected to know by the end of the year. So right now, in November, it's going to look much differently what we want them to know now as opposed to by the time we build to the end of the year.
So just a little visual to give you of how the process really works within a classroom setting. Remember, the teachers are setting goals for their students based on those standards, Common Core or New Jersey standards. The teacher then takes that goal and plans for the instruction based on student need. And that student need may vary. Some students may have it and understand that particular goal, and some students need to continue to work on it. From there, they're going to instruct it in a way that's applicable to that particular student's needs, and they're going to provide the feedback that the student needs in order to continue to move forward. Then they give them a standard-based grade of a 4, 3, 2, 1, which we're going to explain what each of those mean to you in a minute. And then they report that student achievement to you as parent and to the student also. And then the process keeps going until that student has mastered that particular goal. I'm going to just go to the next one
Sure.
since we've already said that. Okay.
So we're going to walk you through what does that mean? What is a 4? What is a 3? What is a 2? What is a 1? We're very used to, many of us went to school, we all understand what a 90 is, we know what an A is, that makes sense to us. But one of the things that we have to walk you through now is this is completely different because we can't relate the two. We can't say a 4 equals an A because that's not what it's looking at this point. So we're going to walk you through each one of those levels. And so for a 4, we're looking at a student that has advanced understanding of that particular standard and is above grade level expectation. They are exceeding that. And they consistently demonstrate those superior academic skills. They're not only doing it here one day and not the next, but 2 weeks from now and not 3 weeks from now and whatnot. It's consistently, independently, and on demand. They're able to exceed those standards. That's what that 4 is. This is advanced knowledge for their grade level. Okay? This is where we have some children that will go, obviously, because you know, as you can imagine, in a classroom you have children at all sorts of different varying levels. And of course, with this, that is really saying, wow, this child is really, really exceeding at a superior level to receive a 4.
Please, it's very hard for all of us. It's hard for parents, it's hard for teachers, it's hard for us.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be hard for our 4th graders, who are used to an A is 100, or because we can't equate the 4 to 100 to an A. And so that's kind of a whole different shift for us. So that's where it's going to be quite an adjustment, I think, for us all.
And I think that one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that it'll be a learning process for all of us, parents, teachers, and us, as we guide through. And as we live this report card, we will educate ourselves and continue to educate you and the community on how this is working in our classroom and what we're learning from it as we go forward. Now the 3 is, oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Oh, no,
Of
you can
course,
ask questions.
Of course.
So, like, from my perspective, right, I'm used to seeing grades, right, and then I could see, okay, this test didn't go well, this quiz didn't go well, that's how they got the 8.5, the 9, whatever.
Right.
So now when I get, like a number, how do I know what it was that they needed to work on? How do we qualify the 4? Like, how do we qualify the 3 to 2? I know that's
No, I know what you're
not
saying.
the right
Yeah.
part of the question.
No.
It's
No,
perfectly
it
fine.
is. It is. I think that what you have to look at is how that child did on that particular thing in terms of demonstrating their knowledge of the material. So basically, how the teachers are designing their tests now, their assessments now, are based on more of a Common Core type of question where the students have to kind of dig deeper if it's LAL, and they need to really cite that evidence, more open-ended questions. How is the child faring in the scheme of that 3? Because 3, if you look at it, the 3 is to be celebrated. That's where we want the kids to be. The 3 is going to show us they've met a proficiency level. So if that child is coming home and they're showing that they've met they've met what that expectation was for that test on a consistent level, then they are probably at a 3. Of course, they've met the proficiency of that level. And it's a conversation with the teachers. We would certainly hope that before tomorrow night or before next week, if your children were not where they needed to be, there has been an ongoing conversation already with the teachers. And this becomes a greater communication between parent and teacher. So in quantifying it, you kind of have to look at how is his work or her work coming home? Is it more of a consistency where, yeah, they're doing what they need to do, or am I seeing that a lot of the things on the test they're struggling with? So it really is being a little bit more on top of the game and communicating the teachers to the parents and parents to teachers.
And I think in the past, I can assume that you were looking at those things anyway, those tests that were coming home, that work, and you were looking at to see, oh, they got this right, they got this wrong. And those are things that you can still absolutely do. But you'll notice that the test questions are different and they're asking more. And that's what you want to really hone in on and see that difference and see, why. I'm sure you can imagine or you can figure out what they were missing on that test, and then that can bring up that conversation piece with the teacher to say, if you're wondering, what can I do to help? How can I help my child at home? And they'll give you some of those those tools too. And over here, I have some handouts for you. Of course, the copies of the report card, but then there are some handouts specifically by grade level that you can also look at to refer to see how you can help your child in those different academic areas as well.
I think, go ahead, Mrs. Tracy.
Oh, no, I just wanted to clarify, so what I'm saying is, so I get that the new grading system is relevant to the report card.
Correct.
But is it also, what you were saying, I mean, is that same grading going to be applied to the individual tests, or are they still going to get an actual grade? That's the piece that I'm not clear on.
Well, and that's a good question. What you'll probably see is you'll still see a 10 out of 12 or a 10 out of 15 or a 15 out of 15, that kind of a thing. But we're getting away from that percentage or that letter grade, but you'll just still get that score, or what you'll start to see a lot more of are rubric scores. And with that, the rubric attached. So if it's a writing piece, they'll give you that rubric that says a 1, this is what you're doing, this is what a 4 should look like, these are the components that a 3 should have, and so on and so forth. But again, that's part of that learning curve for us, and I'm going to be honest, our teachers, it's not like the program came with all these rubrics already ready for them, so they're creating a lot of these things as they go along. But you'll start to see more of those types of things that will be more in alignment with the standards-based grading.
I'm sorry,
Go
is this New Jersey based, or is this Common Core? Like, is this like if you were to go to New York, for example, is this a similar?
Standards-based is becoming more prevalent, yes.
Becoming more
Yes.
international?
One of the things I also wanted to go back to is from kindergarten up until grade 3, we've always graded the students up until this point on an E for emerging, a D for developing, and an M for mastering. So for kindergarten through 3rd grade, there has never really been, through second. I'm sorry, it's K1, 2. There has never really been a very big push toward a numerical grade. It was always this, the child is emerging in this skill, developing, or has mastered this skill. 3rd grade is traditionally where we had started the letter grades and the numeric 2 letter grades, the A, the B, and the C. So I think that the K1, 2, I think parents would be a little bit more comfortable with this 1 and 2 because they've done the E, the D, and the M, and that was more of a conversation for those. I think the biggest shift would be for 3 and 4 because we're still remaining within the Common Core standards, but it was more of a numerical grade transferred over to a letter grade. And so you'll see that in the K1, 2, traditionally, the parents understood when they had a conversation with the teacher what that emerging was or that developing was. And that's on that similar kind of ground where we're going to have those conversations about it.
But as Mrs. DiMatteo mentioned at the beginning of our discussion tonight, how we had a committee and we worked through the adoption process of creating our report card and whatnot, and we looked at lots of schools from New Jersey, different states, and we're trying to see what was out there and what other people were doing because we wanted to make sure we were in alignment with what they were doing. And ours mirrors a lot of the schools that we saw as we looked through that and went through that process last year.
So the 3 is the celebrated.
Oh my God, exactly.
the important
That's where we want children to be. Now, ultimately, that goal is to be at that 3 by the end of the year. Because remember, that standard that's on the report card, we want them to, that's the mastery by the end of the year. So right now, in November, we wouldn't expect them all to be mastering these skills at this point. Obviously, just like anything else, learning is scaffold. We have to scaffold our learning because we can't just automatically jump to the end. One that sticks out, we were having a conversation in 1st grade. For mathematics, for example, children are supposed to be able to count and write and say numbers up to 120. Well, they're not there yet. It's November. The 1st graders haven't gotten to 120 yet. They might be to 30 or 40 or 50, but they're not.
I can tell you the kindergarten was up to 50-something the other day because they count, and they told me when I walked in, we're very close to 100 for the 100 days. They can't wait to do the 100-day of school celebration. So they're getting there.
So you wouldn't see a 3 in that area if you had a 1st grade child because they're not there yet. They're not writing those numbers. They're not saying those numbers. They're not working with those numbers all the way up to 120. And one of the things that we have to have parents understand is take a deep breath and a 2 is okay. It's okay, especially at this time of the year. Approaching the standard is okay. It'll be okay, I promise. Okay.
And that's just what a 2 is.
And so a 2 means they have a basic understanding, or they may be able to do it, but not consistently. And so they partially meet that expectation. They might need a little extra help or a little extra support, or maybe the teacher's giving them more additional time, or they might take their assessment and say, what do you need to do here? And give them a little bit more feedback for them to work a little harder on it. They need that extra support. They're not able to do it independently and on demand, as we keep saying. And so that 2 is saying they still need some more practice with meeting that skill.
And then finally, the 1.
And the 1 is saying that child has a minimal understanding. And this is a situation where if we're seeing a child that is earning a 1 for something, then this is a child that might be referred to our INRS, which is Intervention and Referral Services, in that they need some extra support. We might need to get our interventionist involved. Or we might need to meet and say, what's going on? The way that you're teaching right now, they're not learning those skills, but they need some additional support. They might need a small group setting. They may need some extra support in some way, regardless of whatever that academic content is.
And certainly, if a child is at a 1, I'm sure parents have had the conversations with the teachers already. Knowing our teachers in both buildings, especially in those younger grades, it's that constant conversation that you're having. So if that child needs that extra support, teachers have really reached out to parents already.
Okay. Question?
It's a whole different way of thinking, and it's a little bit hard for us because we're used to, as adults, that numeric grade or that 100 or that 90.
Oh, well, we had that schema. We understood what that meant. That made sense to us. So this is different. And even we're still having conversations with teachers because they're having a hard time because they're very used to putting 85 at the top of the paper. And so we don't want to get into that because it doesn't equate. A 4 doesn't equal 100 or an 85 or any of those things.
I don't have older kids yet, so what happens in middle school?
Good question.
And
Very
we'll
good
get
question.
there with.
Yep, we're almost there.
Right. Okay.
One of the things to keep in mind is that these numbers are not necessarily looking at linear performance. It's not like they're going to get a 1 now, a 2, and then a 3, and then a 4. That's not how it's necessarily working. We're looking at where they are right now, and it may look, their score may be different at the next marking period, and that's okay. It's not just a progression of skills. You might see a child get a 2 in a content in a trimester, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're automatically going to get that 3 the next time.
Right. It might be something they're struggling with, and so you may see that 2, or something that they're mastering, and they're at a 3, and maybe now we're going to take them to that next level, and they'd be above the grade level standard. So it works differently for each trimester. Okay, and the big thing at the bottom, the goal of achieving the Common Core is, remember, this is mastery by the end of the year. Common Core, if you go to corestandards.org, which is what we pointed out before on that one of those first screens, you will see that by grade level, the Common Core standards are listed, and you can see that by the end of each grade level in both math and in language arts, it's very specific about what a child must master by the end of that grade level.
And what's nice about the way they have it laid out is they have K1 and 2 laid beside each other in English language arts. So you can see the overarching skill or the standard might be there listed, but you can see what it looks like in kindergarten, what it looks like in first grade, what it looks like in second grade, and so on. So you can kind of see that progression, but keeping in mind that it's at the end of the year.
Okay, so one of the things that as we started with the report card committee to really notice was that many districts who adopted standards-based grading moved to trimesters. We used to have 4 marking periods within our year. And the reason for that is the Common Core is much more rigorous than the New Jersey standards were in language arts and math. And so by moving to trimesters, instead of us looking at 45-day periods before it was time to sit down and assess the kids on how they were doing at that point in the year, it gives us 60 days. So we're moving from a 45 to a 60-day, which is a big chunk of time for us to really get into the standards, get into those learning goals, really dig deep with the kids, help them and support them in what they need to do to help them to master them. So by moving to trimesters, we give ourselves more time to help the kids to meet these rigorous standards. So we've moved to trimesters. That is the reason why our report cards will now be a December, a March, and June. So it gives 60 days between each of those. Kindergarten will remain just January and June. Because kindergarten just needs, the teachers need more time with them in the beginning of the year and for them to really settle in and get into the routines and the skills that they need. You know, kindergartners, the first month of school sometimes are a little unsure of where they're at. So this kind of gives us more time to work with them. Through the trimesters, the teachers are going to be assessing the students in those different learning goals to see where they are, how they can set new goals for them, and to get them to where they need to be. Okay? The last one, the student performance. Tomorrow night or next week, you're going to see that the teachers have prepared folders for you of your child's work so that they can go through and have a conversation of a writing sample, of what they're doing in reading. They have spelling patterns for you to show you, and math, where they are in math, and different open-ended questions and things like that. So you'll be able to really see evidence of where your child is at in relation to the standards.
And what you might also see, they might share with you a sample of your child's work, but then they may show you an exemplar or one of those anchor papers that this is what we are expecting a child at this time of the year to be able to do. And so they could give you that kind of a sample too. You might see something like that. Just so that, especially if your child is perhaps struggling in some area, you can kind of see where they should be or where we would want them to be, and so that you can kind of see the difference and see what you can do perhaps to help and support at home as well.
Okay, the reason that we wanted to keep conferences in November, even though you won't receive the first progress report until December, is because this is also new. We wanted it to be more of a conversation on what your child is doing. So giving us that time tomorrow night and next week for the teacher to really sit and say, this is where your child is at, this is what we would like to see, or this is where we want him or her to go, to set goals for them. We felt that conversation would be more rich if the teachers can sit with you and show you work samples and really talk about a child and their performance instead of just this grade on a report card. And so make that conversation tomorrow night or next week. Come in prepared. What is it that you want to ask the teachers about where your child is? Or what specific questions do you have as you look through the samples of their work and where they're at? And the teachers will have goals that they've set for the student. They've set them in both math, they've set them in language arts, they're setting them in writing. They really want to be able to tell you where they're ready to bring your child to the next level, or what specific needs that child has that they're working on with you. So, we're really looking forward to these conferences as something new and different this year. As I said, the kindergarten is going to be the same. Grade 4 is maintaining the letter grade, the A, the B, the C, and the D. And that became quite a discussion with grade 4 teachers as we did the progress reports. And one of the reasons that the teachers decided to move that way was we were concerned about the transition of the students from 4th grade into 5th grade, from 4th to middle school. So even though in 4th grade they're still working on learning goals based on the standards, those standards now become more of that traditional A, B, C, and so on. So we wanted that consistency for them as they move. To transition into middle school is a very big deal. I know I taught 5th grade there for 9 years. It's a very big transition, and we wanted to keep it as stable as we could from 4th into 5th. So they're working on those standards, but it will be marked in the traditional way.
So the Common Core and the standard grading then just hold through 3rd grade and then 4th through actually high school?
Oh, it goes all the way up to grade 12, Common
Common
Core.
Core goes all the way through grade 12.
Standard grading that we just talked about, 4, 3, 2.
Right now, it's through elementary,
Just
K-4.
through our third grade, right?
And then it goes back to more of a,
Right,
like you said, letter.
yes, right.
Does the number based system ever come back into play, or is that gone?
Well, we always changed our numerical to a letter grade, even in the middle school and in high school. So it's always been that way, numerical to grade. Correct, Mr. Featherman? In the high school is all numerical.
Numeric in high school. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, it's, yeah.
But
Don't rush it, Mrs. Dr. You have time. Don't rush it.
He's only in kindergarten.
We have time. We have time.
Which well, and he just brought up a great segue here, because one of the things that our next point is that this is a living document, this first go, so to speak. And what they're realizing, and the teachers are realizing, as you do with anything that's new, that we might have to make some changes. And so it might look differently next year. Of course, we'll inform you of those changes as they come along. But I think even I can speak to my fourth grade teachers. They're saying to themselves, maybe we should have went and stayed with the standards-based grading with K3, because again, it's that shift of if children are expected to know and be able to do something by the end of the year, how do you necessarily assign a grade to it? But they're working through it. But nevertheless, it's one of those things that as they're going through it, and even this first marking period, they're like, oh, they're thinking about things. And I keep saying to them, make those notes, and you have to live it and experience it, and then we'll make the changes that we need to make as we move forward throughout the rest of the year.
One thing that we're excited about with the elementary progress reports is that we're moving to Genesis. And Genesis has been, for those of you who may have older students, Genesis is our database, I would say, for grading. The report cards are on there. In the middle school and in the high school, there's a parent portal where they can go in and see almost immediately what the students are doing. You know, a grade, they took a test, the grade is up there. We have always done paper report cards in the elementary school, and we're very close, very, very close to them being on Genesis and electronic then for parents, hopefully in December.
And that's our goal for this
goal
first
is
one
for
to
that.
be in Genesis, and
We're
you'll get
close.
information. We're getting there.
We're good. No, that we're not ready yet. That's the parent portal for elementary. That happens in middle and high school. But we've, in the elementary school, always have just done report cards on paper. And so now we're going to move the report card part into Genesis so you can see the report card electronically, and hopefully then move toward greater things next year.
Our goal
Building
is
on it.
fourth grade to be
Yes.
with the grades and the portal, but we're not there yet for K through 3. We'll see when we get there. It's a work
So
in
that's where we're
progress.
going.
But that is exciting because it's 2014. We want to be.
Teachers are thrilled not to think that they have to do paper report cards and make copies of them, and it'll be up online, and you'll have almost instant access to it that day. So that's
a
nice to
perk.
know.
Yep.
Okay, so we have them out for you. The teachers I know gave you a brochure explaining the report cards at back to school night. You know, as much as we want to say that, you know, go into conferences with this in the back of your mind, we really want you to go into conferences with a very open mind to hear where your child is at, because that's the important thing. I think that what we have to wrap our heads around, and this is all of us involved, is the fact that those standards are really where we want our children to progress to. And so if we can think in terms of, okay, here's what's written on this report card as the important goals for our child to meet in second grade, third grade, and in kindergarten and first grade, and going in and saying, how can we get them there together? Because one of the things that the teachers have worked very hard on, and we've been checking in all week with them, you know, are you prepared? What do you have for the parents? They're showing folders because they want to show you where your child is at. And the best thing I can say to you tonight, and I know Ms. Dyer will agree with me, is go in with questions. Ask questions about where they are. When you see the artifacts, probably the things that they're going to show you, most of them you may have seen already. They've been sent home. But the teachers are going to put those into perspective of where they're at with the standards and where they need to be. And I think it's important for working together, we set goals for the kids as you leave that conference. So we're looking forward to it. It should be a very interesting conversation for you and the teacher.
Quick question. When it comes to the standard grading, is it, obviously the child is, based on where you want them to be, and hopefully, they're growing throughout the year. How much of that is taken into account, like, them against their peer group? Like, does that ever come into play, like how well your son or daughter is, as compared to the rest of the group, or is it really just them compared to where ultimately you want them to be?
Well, I think that's twofold, if
It
I could
is,
jump
yeah.
in for that. No, I
Yeah,
absolutely,
no, it
makes
does.
complete sense. I mean, overall, we're looking at the child's individual needs because that's what we need to do. We need to be able to show growth for each individual student. When we start looking at those comparisons is when we're not sure if this child is excelling and needs to be more stimulated, if you will, or more challenged, or if that child's struggling. And we'll say, well, typically at this age level, this is where we'd like to see them to be. MAP scores are an example of that. You've received your MAP scores, you received them, you'll get, or you should have received them in the charts on there that will say, this is your child's RIT, this is the district mean, and then this is the national mean or the norms that are there. So you can kind of compare that way, and that's one of our indicators where we can look at that we might say, we need to keep our eye on this child. They're either above, are we making sure that we're challenging them enough? Or if they're below, what do we need? Do we need to keep our eye on this child? Do we need to get this child referred to INRS? Do we need some other interventions for this child? What do we need? So sometimes we do compare children in that way, but ultimately our goal overall is to individualize to meet that child's needs, whatever they may be.
Remember, our goal is growth. So it really is an individual basis also, because predominantly I would say, because we want each child to grow. Now, some kids will grow, at a very, very different rate from others. Our goal is that over the course of the year, every child shows some kind of growth within that year. Even when we look at the new assessments that are coming out, it used to be, under NJS, how many kids scored proficient or advanced proficient, and we never really stopped to look at, okay, a child might still have scored partial proficient in third grade and partial proficient in fourth grade, but maybe they went up 15 points within that. That's huge, and yet we've never looked at that as that's the important piece. This child went from here to there, they grew, but it might not be the passing. This gives us the opportunity to look at, is the child growing toward those goals that they need to grow toward? And kids are all different. So I think we have to look at it predominantly as what's good for that particular child. But of course, there's always those exemplars out there of where we want them to be and where we're going to keep pushing them to be. But it's growth. Did your child grow? That's the important thing.
What other questions do you have?
Questions? It's a lot. It's a lot to digest. There's a lot going on. And, for teachers too, it's a lot for them.
They're very overwhelmed in some ways, and we've been working really hard. They're working very hard with us. We have our Common Core Academy that we did last year. And that's voluntary. They come and they show up. They come and they've learned lots of different things about it, on how to effectively expose children to the Common Core state standards. We had our summer academy that we worked with, and they did that voluntary. We didn't pay them, we didn't bribe them, we didn't.
Well, we brought them with a little food when they came to the face-to-face.
But nevertheless, I mean, they're working really hard because they know that that's what needs to happen. And so when we had all of these changes at once, it's overwhelming because the face of education is changing, and we're not doing what we used to do. The teach to the middle is really not going to work right now in 2014, and so they're challenged in many ways, and we're trying to provide as much support as we can for them, and they're still coming to our Common Core academies and our other different kinds of grade level meetings that they're working in their common planning times, and they're working together to really just make sure that they're doing the best that they can for each and every child that walks through their doors every day. So
what I
it's
think
hard
is
work.
refreshing when you walk into a classroom and you see the Daily 5 in place and the structure in place, where kids are all over the room doing all different things, and the teachers are really having that time to work with kids in a different way. So you see kids, sitting on beanbags and they're reading. And today I was in a second grade classroom, and they got so excited when they came in because it was a little group of them who were working on the same topic in something, and they kind of hid themselves behind the teacher's desk because they said, well, there's another group over there working on the same topic, so we're talking about it over here, and we want to be sure that they don't hear our ideas yet because they had to present it. So it's kids are excited about it, and it's a different way of approaching what they're learning, and they're doing it with more conversation, they're more engaged with it, the teachers have more time to work with them. It's a win-win. So, it's exciting to
It is
see the
exciting.
difference and the changes that we talked about all summer. Now we see them, and we see them happening. And so talk to your child about it. Ask them about building stamina, or ask them about what they've done with the teacher maybe today, or conferenced over the week, or set a goal, or about the cafe, and
See
get
how many
them
minutes
talking.
they're up to. They should be able to tell, because a lot of classes, you might even
They
see the
graph it.
chart. They're graphing it. They might be up to
Yeah.
X amount of minutes. Now, like the day of Halloween, their stamina might not been as great as another day, but that's what happens, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But it's funny, because I'll walk into a classroom for whatever reason, and a lot of times kids, they get excited to see me or
Yeah.
to see Mrs. DiMatteo, but they can't, like, to break the stamina, that means that they've stopped reading, so they can't, so they're like
That even
this.
happened to Mr. Featherman. They
Happened
wouldn't
to
even
him.
acknowledge him.
Because they
That's
know that
it.
if they stop reading and pay attention to something else, then that breaks the stamina for the class, and they don't want to do that. So it's exciting to see, and they get very, very, very engaged, and it's amazing. Like I said before at the beginning, 6-year-olds sitting and reading uninterrupted for 20 minutes is quite an accomplishment, especially by November. So.
And I bet you're all wishing you can get them to do that at home.
Actually, I was going to ask, I know a lot of, we've been hearing, read
Mhm.
to kids at home. What are your recommendations to all of us in terms of being able to apply this at home? Are there any other thoughts or suggestions there?
When you go on to coursestandards.org, that site for the New Jersey, the Common Core Standards, there is, if you scroll down, there'll be 3 appendices. And in Appendix B is book lists for grade levels that are more complex texts. And it breaks it down to the fiction, and it breaks it down even further. It'll say fiction, and it'll say fiction read aloud. So what are the books that you can read to your child, which might on that grade level just be a little bit too hard for them to read on their own. Then there'll be just plain fiction that the child can read on their own. There's nonfiction the same way, nonfiction, and then nonfiction read aloud, and then poetry for read aloud, and then just poetry for the child to read. And you'll be able then to choose good books for them from that list. But the other important thing to do is when you have a conversation with your child's teacher, you can ask them their DRA level, because that will be their independent reading level. And when you get your MAP scores, if you look at the MAP score, there's something called a Lexile score on that. That's also giving you an indication of what their reading level is. You can then get books on those levels. Like if you go to scholastic.com, there's something called the Book Wizard. And if you click on the Book Wizard and put in your child's DRA level or a certain book that the child might be interested in, it will give you that DRA level. And so you can really judge their books according to their independent reading level. So it would make it a better choice at home, so the child isn't reading a book that's below their reading level, because that's not stretching them at all to get it to a higher level. Or you can really have the teacher help you, have your child's teacher help you with the level that they should be reading. Most books, if you go to Scholastic, if a child picks a book from a library shelf, if you go to Scholastic and type in that book, it'll give you the DRA level, the Lexile level. It gives you all that information, and you can really be sure your child is reading just the right book for them.
And there are apps for that too. I'm sure you're shocked, but
Yeah.
you can. There's an app for that.
Scholastic is
Yeah, and
the
you can-
Scholastic app.
If there's a barcode on the book, you can
Scan
zap
it.
the barcode, and it'll come up and tell you what that
Yeah.
level is. So that
It's
will
kinda
help
scary.
you. It will help you with that piece,
Yeah.
because what she's talking about is true. If a child's reading a book that's too difficult for them, they're spending way too much time decoding, they're not getting to that comprehension level, and they're not understanding it. So what's the point? But those are things that then you might read to the child, and that's okay too. And having those conversations about, if you're seeing a child's coming home with a test and they're expected to describe the character traits of that character, Well, when you're reading with them, have them describe that character. How would you describe that character? And using those rich vocabulary words instead of kids get very used to saying things like he's happy.
He's cool.
He's nice.
He's awesome.
I like him. And kids will say that, but you want them to be able to dig deeper. So take a look at what they're coming home with their assessments and kind of model your questions after those kinds of questions. That's something else that you can do as well.
Yeah. It's
Good
not only
question.
reading to them, but really talking to them about their reading, or have them write something about their reading. We stress a lot of writing in school because reading and writing is so connected. Have them write a little, especially if they're, first grade, second grade, a little sentence about what they've read, or really express it in different ways to you, because what we're really trying to get kids to do is to converse about their reading, not just read it and close a book, but the more they converse of it through the book, you get the idea, are they understanding what this book is about, or is it way above them? And if they're reading something that's too easy for them, how are we stretching them? So we want them to have that good fit. Like Goldilocks. It's really called the Goldilocks. Is it just right? Is it too hard, too easy, or just right? We want that just right book for them. Mm-hmm.
So I am so grateful that these things are together. So I brought the virus report because I thought, I don't know, speak prepared, I guess. But and I have the report card. This explains so much more to me than when I was at my house trying to understand this.
Well, I'm so glad you came.
As an educator, like, I was like, I've never seen this before. I have no idea what's going on. But then seeing how it's broken down, like here's the standard and here it is, I can see my child better.
Right.
And so I want to these two things together have made the difference instead of a sample.
That's
of what
right.
it was.
Absolutely.
These two things have
Yes.
made the difference for me. So
Good. Excellent. And you go in now ready to prepared for that conversation. Excellent.
definitely, yeah.
Very good.
That's what we like to hear.
Yeah. Good.
And we want to provide these types of opportunities for you too. So if there's things that you're knowing that you want to know more about, Maddie and I travel. We'll do
Yeah. We take the show on the road.
show on the road.
And I saw algebraic, and I'm like, algebraic? What the heck is going on over there? I'm like, algebraic, like, I'm a high school person. Algebra. And I didn't understand, but now I look at it, I'm like, oh, all right, now I get, that seems much more easy. I'm not a math person, I'm a history teacher, but like, so thinking that my son's doing algebraic thinking in kindergarten kind of threw me.
Yep.
But they are building that foundation.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Just think when you get them in high
I
school.
can't even imagine. I'm so excited for the journey.
And they're working hard, and we have definitely raised the bar, and our expectations are higher because we want them to be ready for that next year, or we want them to be ready for middle school, and we want them to be ready for high school and then college and career. So that's ultimately our goal, and they have to work hard to do it, and we're all working hard. And so we're hoping that they're going home as tired as we are, so that you can have a nice, peaceful night at home. I know, right?
Is the Common Core an elective state by state, or it is?
For the most part,
Kansas, they
Right.
not have Common Core.
No, I think it's 40.
I think Kansas is in there. I think they're I think
40
40. I think it was
46
46 is the last number that I've heard.
adopted it.
46 states. I think it could be. I think
Yeah.
Mr. Featherman's Googling it as we speak. No, I'm not sure,
You
but
know,
it's up there.
We know that there
Some-
were some years where you would get a child that moved in from another state, and the curriculum that they had was so different, and there were such gaps for this poor child because of the fact that from state to state standards were so different. So really, this does kind of give us more of a consistent playing ground throughout the nation, but it's a high number of states who have adopted Common Core.
Any other questions? Comments, thoughts? Well, we do appreciate you taking
Oh,
time out of your
absolutely.
evening on this cold night to come out and join us. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And if you have any other questions or concerns, you know where to find Mrs. DiMatteo and I.
Yep.
So we're here to
Rounds.
help you in any way and support whatever we
Right.
can do. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.